There's a quiet fear creeping through the edges of our collective mind. Not the fear of losing a job or being replaced by something faster, smarter, more efficient, but a deeper fear, one harder to name, the fear that maybe, just maybe, we were never really needed at all, not as we are, not with our doubts, our longings, our stories, the kind of fear that whispers at night when everything is silent but your own soul asking if it still has a place in this world. You see, the anxiety surrounding artificial intelligence isn't just technological, it's existential. It's not about robots doing your tasks. It's about what remains when those tasks no longer define you. When your worth, your function, your role can be performed perfectly by something that feels nothing, remembers nothing, dreams of nothing, and you still feel everything. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the unintegrated parts of our psyche, the things we reject, deny, or exile. What if AI, in its mechanical perfection, is our modern shadow, a projection of everything we try not to be, unemotional, disconnected, hollow? And what if in fearing it, we're actually avoiding ourselves? Because here's the truth. The danger isn't that a machine will take your job. The danger is that it might do it without the pain you carry, without the longing that drives you, without the memories that shape you. It doesn't need to heal from childhood wounds to answer emails. It doesn't tremble before speaking its truth. It doesn't wonder who it is when it wakes up in the morning. And that, perhaps, is what terrifies us most. When something can replicate your skills, but not your scars, you're forced to face a brutal question. What am I beyond what I produce? Because we've been taught that our value lies in our usefulness, in our efficiency, in our performance. But AI has no story, no shame, no soul. It just works. And when that's enough, where does that leave you? We live in a culture that glorifies productivity, as if producing more, faster, better, somehow fills the hole inside. But that hole, it isn't a defect, it's a doorway, and the machine can't walk through it. Only you can. The real threat of AI isn't that it replaces what you do, it's that it mirrors how little of your humanity you've been allowed, or have dared, to live. We've already begun replacing ourselves. Every time we hide what's messy, every time we suppress the chaos that makes us real, every time we trade presence for performance. And so, this video isn't a warning about technology. It's an invitation to return, to remember, to rehumanize what you've been taught to suppress. Because the machine might take the task, but it will never carry your anguish. It will never hesitate from love. It will never bleed with meaning. And maybe, just maybe, that's where your true irreplaceability begins. There's something unsettling about watching a machine do what once made us feel special. But long before the algorithms arrived, something had already begun to die inside. A quiet erosion, a subtle resignation. We were trained, not by machines, but by systems, to perform instead of feel, to produce instead of live. And slowly, without noticing, many of us became reflections of what the world demanded, not of who we actually are. The performance culture didn't wait for AI to tell us we were replaceable. It told us every time we sacrificed rest for relevance, every time we silenced our inner chaos to appear in control, every time we chose speed over soul, we became efficient, predictable, optimized. And in that process, something sacred went missing. There's a part of you, wild, untamed, unpredictable, that was never meant to be optimized. But when that part is rejected long enough, it goes underground, into what Jung called the unconscious. And what rises in its place is a persona, a mask, shaped by expectation and fear. This mask can work, it can succeed, but it cannot feel, it cannot long, it cannot love. And yet, we try. We try to beat the machine by becoming more like it, more precise, more consistent, more productive. But in doing so, we lose something the machine can never replicate: our capacity to suffer meaningfully, to grow through pain, to err and evolve, not despite failure, but because of it. A machine can repeat, but only a human can transform. There's an unconscious desire in many of us to become more predictable, not because it's natural, but because unpredictability reminds us of our own inner chaos. And that chaos terrifies us, so we choose the known, the safe, the measurable. And in doing so, we slowly replace ourselves with a version that cannot hold the weight of real life. What part of you has been edited out to fit into someone else's template? What feeling did you bury just to be seen as professional? Where did you trade your mystery for metrics? These are not abstract questions. They are mirrors, because the cost of relevance is often your own essence. And in the name of surviving, many have forgotten how to be alive. Jung might ask, what are you trying to optimize? And what part of your soul is paying the price? There is still time. Time to return, time to remember, but not as a better version of the mask, as the self you were, before performance became survival, before productivity became identity, before relevance became your only form of love. There's a moment, often quiet, almost invisible, when you realize you haven't felt boredom in months. Not real boredom, not the kind that opens space for wonder or silence. Just the hollow hum of constant stimulation, one more notification, one more checklist, one more dopamine hit disguised as progress. And yet, something inside still aches, still waits, still wonders. In this world, emotions have been reduced to obstacles. Restlessness must be fixed, sadness must be medicated, silence must be filled. The automated world doesn't ask how you feel. It asks how quickly you can return to function. And so, we adapt. We download another app. We plan our sleep, track our steps, organize our minds. But the soul doesn't move in straight lines. Neuroscience tells us that dopamine is the reward chemical. But when reward becomes routine, we begin to crave more just to feel less. This isn't just addiction, it's architecture. The architecture of an existence where feeling too much is dangerous, where slowness is weakness, where inner life is a distraction from performance. We don't fail to organize ourselves because we lack discipline. We fail because what we're organizing is not our true self. It's a version of us designed for consumption, designed for visibility, designed to not disturb the system. And in that design, something sacred disappears. There's a model of thought many live by now, one that whispers, if I just optimize everything, I will finally be at peace. But peace doesn't come from control. It comes from presence. And presence is born in places control cannot reach. Uncertainty, contradiction, emotional truth. We've been conditioned to run from these places, to replace them with systems. But the systems don't save us. They numb us. Somewhere along the way, many lost the ability to sit with discomfort, to stare at the wall, to let the soul wander without needing to produce something in return. And in losing that, we lost a gateway, a passage into ourselves, not the efficient self, the real one. There's something deeply human about boredom, about being still long enough for grief to rise, for longing to return, for forgotten dreams to breathe again. When we avoid these spaces, we don't escape our pain, we prolong it. We stretch the ache across a lifetime and call it being busy. Reintroducing creative chaos isn't about losing control. It's about remembering that control was never the point. You were not made to be a spreadsheet. You were not designed to be downloaded. You are not a system. You are a soul. And sometimes, the most revolutionary act in a world obsessed with doing is simply to feel again. It's tempting to believe that whoever understands the machine best will hold the future, that the key to survival is technical skill, digital fluency, staying one step ahead of the algorithm. But power, real power, has never belonged to those who merely operate systems. It belongs to those who see through them, those who understand not just what the machine does, but what it does to us. Machiavelli once wrote that perception shapes power more than truth. In today's world, perception is shaped by algorithms, by metrics, by data. And yet, there's something dangerously seductive about this. Because when data appears objective, it becomes difficult to question. Even when it erodes your humanity, we begin to trust numbers over nuance, engagement over emotion, optimization over meaning. And in doing so, we surrender something far more fragile than privacy, We surrender the complexity of our own inner world. The machine does not care if you are ashamed. It does not pause when you doubt yourself. It does not wonder if the person behind the keyboard still knows why they are here. The real risk of this era is not technological dependence, it's emotional colonization, the slow, silent invasion of your mind by values that do not belong to you. The belief that you must be constantly visible to exist, that you must be validated externally to feel real, that your pain must be packaged to be acceptable. And somewhere in that process, you begin to disappear, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, in subtle choices, in the language you start to use, in the moments you no longer allow yourself to feel. The loss is not loud, it is intimate, and that makes it harder to notice and harder to reverse. There are moments, rare, disorienting, when a quiet truth emerges, when you realize your thoughts no longer feel like your own, when you speak and something inside wonders who you're performing for, when you wake up and the first thing you feel is not curiosity, but measurement. A man once built software that changed lives. He was brilliant, respected, but one day he walked away, not because he was tired, not because he failed, but because he could no longer remember what it felt like to want something for himself. His desire had been outsourced, his soul automated. This is not a warning, it is a mirror. The machine is not your enemy, but it will never love you. It will never ask how your childhood shaped your fear of rejection. It will never wait while you unlearn the patterns that keep you small. And that is precisely why the battle is not with AI. The battle is with the part of you that agreed to forget who you are. As long as you are accepted, to master the self in this age is not to resist the machine. It is to remember what the machine cannot touch. The trembling, the yearning, the silence between thoughts, the courage to want something real, even when no one else sees it. There comes a point, often quiet, sometimes violent, when the soul no longer accepts borrowed meanings, when the roles you've performed, the expectations you've met, the identities you've sustained, begin to crumble, not because you failed, but because they were never truly yours. This collapse, though terrifying, is not the end. It is the beginning of individuation, the first breath after the death of illusion. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, not as domination over others, but as a reclaiming of inner authority. In a world seduced by automation, this inner power becomes essential because the machine threatens only what is fragile inside us, what is unexamined, what has been constructed by fear, not forged in truth. And so we fear being replaced, not because we will lose income, but because we might lose our identity. And if identity has always been rooted in function, in status, in usefulness, then yes, the machine becomes a threat. But if identity emerges from essence, from presence, from self-knowing, then no algorithm can touch it. There's a deeper question hiding beneath the surface of our panic. What would you do with your life if no one needed you to be useful? If the system no longer had a space for your productivity? Who would you become? This question doesn't seek comfort. It demands honesty, because the machine strips away the illusion of necessity. And what remains is terrifying. Freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't come with applause or permission. The kind that asks, what do you love when no one is watching? For many, the collapse of relevance feels like death. And in some ways, it is. But it's the death of the false self, the ego that was crafted to survive, not to feel. The persona that learned to smile when it wanted to scream. The version of you that was tolerated, but never truly alive. And from that death, something new can be born. Not the old self improved, not the wounded self disguised, but the self that remembers. The self that aches and laughs and wanders. The self that stops asking for permission to exist. In the ruins of technological nihilism, the belief that nothing matters unless it can be measured, there is a seed of rebirth, the sacred chaos that precedes real life. Confronting this is not easy. It shakes the ground beneath everything you've built. But sometimes, the collapse is the initiation. The breaking open is the invitation. And the machine, cold, efficient, indifferent, becomes the unexpected teacher, not because it shows you what you should be, but because it reveals what you've forgotten you already are. And in that remembering, something sacred stirs. A life not built on function, but on fire, on essence, on a truth that doesn't need to compete, because it never belonged to the system in the first place. It's strange, isn't it, that something so mechanical, so lifeless, so devoid of feeling, might be the very thing that brings us back to ourselves, that in the cold, clean efficiency of artificial intelligence, we might finally see what we have abandoned, not just in our work, but in our being. The machine performs without fatigue, without doubt, without love. It never hesitates before making a choice. It never questions why it exists. And in that lack, it throws a sharp light on what makes us human, not our perfection, but our contradictions, our flaws, our hunger to mean something. When the machine takes over a function, it doesn't just free us from the task. It challenges us to ask, was I only this? Was I only a role, a routine, a title? And when that answer crumbles, a deeper question rises. What remains when I'm no longer necessary? This is where the crisis begins, but also where healing becomes possible. Many fear the loss of identity that comes with automation, but perhaps that fear is a doorway, a chance to confront the uncomfortable truth that for too long we've defined ourselves by what we produce. And now, stripped of that disguise, we are invited to rediscover a kind of identity that the machine will never replicate. The machine does not long. It does not grieve. It does not forgive. It does not create art from heartbreak or wisdom from pain. It does not dream. And maybe that's its limitation. And our gift. We are capable of presence, of depth, of standing still in front of a sunset and weeping without knowing why, of touching another soul and feeling the mystery of being alive reverberate in our chest. These are not errors. These are not inefficiencies. These are sacred. And yet, many of us have outsourced our emotional lives to systems. We've handed over our desires to trends, our values to metrics, our silence to noise. We've become strangers to our own depth, not because we don't have it, but because we've forgotten how to enter it. But now, something is shifting. The rise of AI might be the catalyst we didn't ask for, but deeply needed, because it forces a confrontation with the question we've postponed. What in me cannot be replaced? What in me is not a function, but a flame? There's a paradox here. In fearing being replaced, we may finally return to what makes us irreplaceable. In watching machines succeed at doing, we might remember how to simply be, because the machine does not carry a shadow. It does not dream of its childhood. It does not tremble when it loves. And perhaps that is why it will never truly be dangerous. Not in the way we think, not compared to a human soul who has learned how to feel again. There is a silence that comes after the noise, after the panic of being outperformed, outpaced, outshined by machines. In that silence, something ancient begins to stir, a question not about survival, but about truth, about essence, about who we are when there is nothing left to prove. Artificial intelligence will not take your soul, but it might take the mask you've worn for far too long, the mask of usefulness, of certainty, of constant control. And when that mask falls, what's left is raw and real and human. Nietzsche wrote of the necessity to die in order to become, not a literal death, but a psychic one, a death of the false self, the ego bound to roles, to status, to external validation. This moment in history, this rise of intelligent machines, may be the perfect storm that invites that death. Not to destroy you, but to awaken you. Because what truly aches in us is not the fear of being replaced. It is the grief of having lived so long as someone we never were. The grief of having survived by performing instead of belonging. The grief of having traded mystery for mastery and finding it wasn't enough. But in that grief, there is a doorway. To be dispensable to a system is not a curse. It is a liberation. It forces you to ask what no resume, no algorithm, no performance review can answer. What in me is still alive? What part of me whispers in the silence, untouched by function, unseen by metrics, still burning beneath all this machinery? That question is not academic, it's sacred. And it may be the most urgent question of our time, because the real danger is not the rise of machines. It is our own apathy in the face of what is most essential, our capacity to feel, to wonder, to become, not as tools, not as brands, but as souls. And so, perhaps, the final question is not, will I be replaced? But rather, what must die in me so that what is truly irreplaceable can be born? That answer won't come in an update or a code. It comes in stillness, in courage, in the quiet return to the parts of you that the world never needed, but your soul always did.